My name is Liza, and I live in Austin, Texas, with my mom, Sandra, and my dad, David. I'm 18 years old, just finishing up high school, and for as long as I can remember, my family life has always felt complicated. On the surface, people might think we're just another regular family, but behind closed doors, it's a different story. My dad has always been the kind of man who cares about money more than people. He's sharp-tongued, quick to anger, and never seems satisfied, no matter what my mom does for him. My mom, on the other hand, is one of the most patient and kind-hearted people I know. She works hard, sometimes too hard, to keep everything together, even when my dad demands more than she can give. Growing up, I never fully understood why my mom put up with it. She would always brush off my concerns, saying, "It's fine, Liza. Some things are just complicated." But as I got older, it became impossible to ignore the constant tension in the house. The shouting, the guilt trips, and the way my dad always managed to make her feel like she owed him something. It wasn't always bad, though. There were days when things felt almost normal, and I clung to those moments like lifeboats in a storm. But deep down, I knew those moments wouldn't last. I spent a lot of time at my best friend Mia's house just to escape the heavy atmosphere at home. Her family was everything I wished mine could be: warm, supportive, and loving. It was like stepping into another world. Still, I always came back, mostly because of my mom. She was my anchor in all the chaos. Even though she rarely stood up to my dad, she was always there for me, helping with school projects, cheering me on at soccer games, or just sitting with me in the quiet moments when I needed someone to listen. I don't know how she managed to stay so strong, but I admired her for it. Looking back now, I think I always knew something had to change. Our lives were like a rubber band stretched too thin, just waiting to snap. And one day, it finally did. But at that time, I couldn't have guessed how much everything was about to shift. It all started on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where nothing seems out of the ordinary until everything comes crashing down. I had just come back from spending the day at my best friend Mia's house. We'd been watching movies and talking about our plans for college next year. It felt nice to be somewhere calm, somewhere I didn't have to tiptoe around anyone's temper. But as soon as I opened the front door to my house, that uneasy feeling hit me again. The shouting started before I even made it past the entryway. My dad's voice was booming, sharp, and relentless, echoing off the walls. I couldn't make out everything he was saying at first, but the anger in his tone was unmistakable. As I stepped closer to the living room, the words became clearer, each one like a punch in the gut. "How dare you give me your inheritance money and not tell me? Do you think you can just hide things from me? I need that money," he bellowed. I froze in my tracks, my heart sinking. My mom's voice, much quieter, was trembling as she tried to explain herself. "David, I didn't hide anything from you. That money was for Liza and me. It's all we have for emergencies or her college." "Emergency?" he shouted, cutting her off. "I'm the emergency. I've got debts to pay, and you're sitting on cash like it's nothing. You're my wife, Sandra. That money is mine too." I stood there, not sure if I should interrupt or stay silent. My hands were shaking as I clutched my backpack, wishing I could disappear. But then my dad saw me. His eyes flicked over to where I was standing, and for a moment, everything went eerily quiet. The rage on his face softened, not into anything kind, but into something cold and calculating, like he'd been caught. "What are you doing just standing there?" he snapped at me, but his tone was less aggressive now, as if he didn't want me to hear too much. "Go to your room." Before I could say anything, my mom stepped in. Her voice was still shaky, but there was a determination in it I hadn't heard before. "Liza," she said softly, "go to your room and pack your things. We're leaving." I turned to look at her, stunned. "What? Mom, what are you talking about?" "We're leaving this house," she said, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. "I can't do this anymore. I won't let you grow up thinking this is normal." "You want to leave?" my dad sneered. "Fine. Go, pack your bags and get out of my house. You're nothing without me anyway." He waved his hand dismissively, like we were just some inconvenience he wanted to be rid of. My mom's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might change her mind. But then she straightened up, wiped her tears, and nodded. "Come on, Liza," she said firmly. "Go pack." I wanted to argue, to tell her this was crazy, but something about the way she looked at me stopped me. It was like she was finally done trying, done hoping. done letting him control everything. So I turned and went to my room, my heart pounding as I threw clothes into a bag as fast as I could. I could still hear my dad muttering under his breath, calling my mom ungrateful and worse things I won't repeat. When I came back downstairs, my mom was waiting by the door, holding her own small suitcase. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set in a way that told me she wasn't backing down. My dad was sitting in his recliner, glaring at us like we were the problem, like we were the ones ruining everything. "Go on," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Leave. Don't come crawling back when you realize you can't survive without me." I clenched my fists, fighting back the urge to say something, but my mom just opened the door and motioned for me to follow her. As we stepped outside, the evening air hit me like a jolt of reality. This was it. We were really leaving. I glanced back one last time to see my dad still sitting there, staring at the TV like nothing had happened, like we were nothing to him. We didn't talk much that night. My mom drove us to a small motel on the other side of town, and we sat in silence for a long time, just trying to process what had happened. I wanted to ask her a million questions, how we were going to manage, what we were going to do next. But all I could do was sit there and hold her hand. That night, as I lay awake on the stiff motel bed, I realized something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't scared of what my dad might say or do. I was scared of the unknown, yes, but there was also a strange sense of relief. We were free, at least I hoped we were. A year later, I thought I finally moved on. It wasn't easy, but my mom and I had started to rebuild our lives. After leaving that night, we stayed in a cramped motel for a couple of weeks before my mom found a small apartment for us. It wasn't much, a tiny 2-bedroom place with creaky floors and mismatched furniture, but it was ours. For the first time, we didn't have to walk on eggshells or brace ourselves for shouting matches. The silence felt strange at first, almost too quiet, but eventually, it started to feel peaceful. I threw myself into school, determined to make my mom proud. I worked part-time at a local coffee shop to save up for college, and my mom picked up extra shifts at her job to help make ends meet. Things were still tight financially, but we made it work. Mom was happier, lighter somehow, even when she was exhausted. I didn't realize just how much of herself she'd been hiding until we left. She started lacking more, making little jokes, and even talking about her dreams, things she'd long buried while trying to keep my dad happy. By the time my 19th birthday rolled around, I felt like I was finally in a good place. I'd invited a few close friends over to celebrate, a small, low-key gathering in our apartment. Mia was there, of course, along with a couple of friends from school and work. Mom had gone all out, decorating the living room with streamers and balloons she picked up on sale. She even baked me a cake from scratch, despite insisting she wasn't much of a baker. It was lopsided and slightly burnt on one side, but I didn't care. It was perfect because she made it. We were in the middle of laughing about something Mia said when there was a knock at the door. I figured it was one of my neighbors or maybe another friend arriving late. But when I opened the door, my heart dropped. There he was, my dad. He looked different, almost unrecognizable. His clothes were wrinkled and slightly dirty, and his face was thinner, with deep lines etched into his skin. For a moment, I just stood there stunned. I hadn't seen or heard from him since the night we left. He hadn't called, texted, or made any attempt to find us. Until now. "Liza," he said, his voice cracking. "Happy birthday." He tried to smile, but it looked forced, almost desperate. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold and sharp. I could feel everyone behind me go silent, their laughter replaced by awkward tension. I just wanted to see you," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "I know I haven't been around, but I've been thinking about you, about both of you." I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. "A little late for that, don't you think?" "Please, Liza," he said, his tone shifting to something more pitiful. "I've lost everything. The house, my job, everything. I messed up, okay? I just want my chance to make things right." I could feel my chest tightening, anger bubbling up inside me. How dare he show up here, on my birthday of all days, and try to play the victim? I glanced back at my mom, who had stepped into the hallway. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "You kicked us out," I said, my voice rising. "Do you remember that? You told us to leave and never come back, and now you want us to forgive you? To just forget everything you did?" I know I was wrong, he said quickly, holding up his hands like he was surrendering. I wasn't thinking straight. I've changed, Liza. Please, I just want my family back. Family? I scoffed, feeling the weight of every argument, every insult, every moment of pain he caused. You didn't care about family when you were screaming at mom or demanding money that wasn't yours. You only care now because you have nothing left. Liza, please, he begged, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. By now, everyone in the room was watching, the birthday celebration completely derailed. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see what I would do. My mom stepped forward then, her voice calm but firm. David, she said, you need to leave. This isn't the time or place for this. But he ignored her, his eyes locked on me. Liza, you're my daughter. Please, I'm begging you. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body tense. For a moment, I thought about giving in, about letting him stay just to avoid making a scene. But then I remembered all the nights I'd heard my mom crying herself to sleep, all the times I'd felt helpless and scared in my own home. And I knew I couldn't let him back into our lives. Not now, not ever. No, I said firmly, my voice steady. You don't get to ruin my life again. You don't get to ruin my mom's life again. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Liza, he started, but I cut him off. Get out, I said, my voice rising. Now. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at me like he couldn't believe what I just said. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I shut the door behind him, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. The room was silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. But then my mom came over and wrapped her arms around me, and I felt some of that weight lift. I looked around at my friends, who were all giving me encouraging smiles, and I realized something important. I wasn't alone. I had people who cared about me, who supported me, and I didn't need my dad to feel whole. The party didn't go exactly as planned, but in the end, it didn't matter. I had stood up for myself, for my mom, and for the life we'd worked so hard to build. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud. As the door clicked shut behind him, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had finally stood up for my mom, for myself, and I knew I wasn't going to let my dad drag us back into his mess. The weight of the past year lifted just a little, and I felt a rush of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. The party didn't exactly go as planned, but in that moment, I didn't care. My mom was by my side, and my friends surrounded me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. I wasn't defined by my father's mistakes or his absence. I was my own person now, stronger, freer, and proud of the life we were building together. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living on my own terms.